along with the Commission on Immigrant Rights and Citizenship and several other groups, we've put together this evening of information on LGBTQ plus immigrants and asylum seekers. Let me give you a quick overview of what the evening will look like, and then we'll get started with it. We will have two lawyers, Stephanie Fisher and Lisa Weinberg, who are going to talk about some of the legal issues involved. And we will see two short trailers and a very short film. The links to the trailers and the films that they are trailers for are in your handout that's this shape. So you can watch them at home again or in the full movie. I also want to point out that to ask two things. One, everybody turn off their mobile phones, even though they don't ring down here anyway, but you know, we don't want any alarms or anything going off. Secondly, we'd like to ask you to refrain from taking photographs. We will have a photographer here and CCTV is here, but they both will only be taking pictures on the stage. So even for the Q&A, when you line up here, your voice will be recorded, but your face will not. So if you don't want to be identified, just don't identify yourself verbally. There's a lot of people to thank for making this whole evening possible, and I'll try and go through them quickly. The committee that consisted of several commissioners from both the LGBTQ plus and the Commission on Immigrant Rights and Citizenship. Let me quickly read some names. Nancy Schlachter, Linda Daniels, Aaron Stone, Abby Duker, Susan Bernstein, Kim Topping, Yarlinas Villeman, Marcio Macedo, Long John Zwamberry, and Priscilla Lee. And I want to give a special thank you to Greg McDonnell, Alicia Chandler, and Noe Kamalamala, who really stepped up and did more than their share of work to make this happen. So thank you, all of you. I'd also just like to thank each slide. These are the two commissions I just mentioned. Speak Out is the LGBTQ Speakers Bureau. The Refugee Immigration Ministry, RIM, and these are all in your handout. Community Legal Services and Counseling Center, that's Lisa. Arujo and Fisher, that's Stephanie Fisher over there. The Cambridge Public Library. And we've also had some tabling information outside from the Cambridge Health Alliance and Tufts United for Immigrant Justice. And of course, and the network La Red. And of course we have to thank the people who brought us the food. Basil Tree Catering, Cambridge Common, Darwin's Limited, and Whole Foods Market. Thank you. If you want to add your name to one of the email lists for the two commissions, down at the bottom of your handout, it gives you an email address you can send it to. What else? Oh, I guess we should just get started. So let me introduce to you Stephanie Fisher, who's immigration and asylum lawyer with Arujo and Fisher, and Lisa Weinberg, who's an asylum attorney at the Community Legal Services and Counseling Center. Stephanie and Lisa.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, is that thing on? Okay. I'm going to assume it's on. Lisa's going to make sure I don't go over my allotted time. So Lisa being an expert in asylum, I'm going to talk about some stuff that's not asylum. Specifically, we know that our U.S. immigration system is racist, xenophobic, discriminates on the basis of religion, the country you come from. So I'm going to leave that to the side for the moment because I'm just going to take that as a given. But I'm going to talk specifically about the ways that LGBTQ people have been treated in the system that's been unfair, which intersects with all that other stuff, to be sure. So a little background so that you know what I'm talking about. There's a couple different ways you could go about getting permanent residency in the United States, otherwise known as a green card. Typically, people are petitioned for by their families or their employers, or they apply for asylum or some other kind of humanitarian relief. I'm going to leave asylum to Lisa. And clearly, if you could only be sponsored by a spouse, you could only be sponsored by a heterosexual spouse up until same-sex marriage was recognized. But let's talk about other ways. Before even we had the fall of DOMA and we're like, oh sweet, same-sex marriage, now we can do all the petitioning. It wasn't just that we were here and we went here. We were all the way down. We had all sorts of fun and terrible and crazy bars to entering the United States and getting a green card or getting citizenship that have been set up for us by the US immigration system over time. So to understand that, first I need to give you a little terminology. If you are inadmissible to the United States, that means they're not going to let you in or they're not going to give you a green card. If you're removable or deportable, that means even if you're in the United States with a green card, they'll take it away and put you on a boat. If something is waivable, that means it's forgivable. Maybe you're not going to get deported, maybe you are going to be let in. And finally, there's this other terrible term called good moral character, which is something you need to become a citizen. And that's a delightfully vague term that, yes, has been used against LGBT people repeatedly. So let's start not at the beginning, before there was any immigration system, but in 1952, they wrote up an Immigration Act, and they said, we're not going to let in people afflicted with a psychopathic personality, epilepsy, or a mental defect. And they also wanted to put in sexual deviants. Let's make sure we keep them out. But the Health Service came back and said, no, you don't need to put that in. That's clear. That's clearly under psychopathic personality. And for that reason, gay people were explicitly excluded. Until 1963, when one of the courts of appeals said, I don't know, that's really vague. Doesn't seem like it necessarily includes homosexuals. And 1965, Congress goes, oh, let me be more clear. So they put into the act, no, everyone who is a sexual deviant is going to be inadmissible, just so we all knew where we stood. Later on, the Public Health Service, which is kind of Health and Human Services, in 1979, they say, you know what, we're not going to certify homosexuals as being psychopathic personalities anymore. Well, what are you going to do? How do you keep people out? At that point in 1989, they said, okay, fine, we're not gonna look for homosexuals anymore, but if anyone admits to being a homosexual, we think we have to keep them out anyway. And they said, but only if they admit it. And supposedly it was gonna be a don't ask, don't tell thing. In reality, tons of people got harassed at borders, got harassed in green card interviews into admitting to be gay, admitting to be a homosexual, and were denied green cards or entry. It wasn't until 1990, which I think was within the lifetimes of most of the people in this room, that sexual deviance provision was finally kicked out of the law. If you thought, sweet, 1990, we're all good, well, don't worry, because we're excluding people with HIV. And we were doing that for, I say we, the United States government, was doing that for a super long time, until the early 1990s, when Health and Human Services said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't designate HIV as a danger to the United States. I think people with HIV could come in, and Congress went, no. So they put it explicitly in the law, we're not gonna let people with HIV in. And that sucks, because a whole bunch of our community was obviously afflicted by the HIV/AIDS crisis. It's another barrier that they were putting in the way of people. Another major barrier to getting a green card would be if you don't have good moral character, or if you've committed something called a crime involving moral turpitude. Sounds ominous, right? Sounds like something they'll use against us. They did. From the beginning, a crime involving moral turpitude would be anything you did that shocks the public conscience as being inherently base, vile, or depraved.
Harvey Weinstein.
Contrary to the rules of morality and the duties owed between man and man. So obviously, people who got convicted under old-fashioned laws that criminalized sodomy, that criminalized homosexual solicitation, that criminalized disorderly conduct, public lewdness. This was the kind of stuff police would arrest LGBT people for being gay in public. Okay. Yeah, we each have 10. Oh yeah, I get to keep rambling. Yeah. No, you're good. So if you got convicted of an offense like that and you had a crime involving moral turpitude, then that could stop you from getting a green card, that could stop you from getting naturalization. So there's various ways that in the past you would be barred from entering or getting a green card. In terms of applying for naturalization, for a super long time, you couldn't establish good moral character if they knew that you were a homosexual. It wasn't until 1981 that they said if you admitted to having private, consensual same-sex relations, they wouldn't stop you from getting your naturalization. If any of those things weren't true, for instance, you were caught in public, or if it was disorderly in some way, somebody knew about it, then you could still be barred from getting citizenship. On top of all that stuff, which was all just about sort of the LGB part of our acronym, there were tons of barriers for trans people for a super long time. In 2004, there was a special memo that went out to USCIS, that's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And they said, we don't really, we know there's a problem because transgender people exist, and we think they're marrying people. And if that forms a heterosexual relationship, we don't know what to do because it seems like people are trying to get around the Defense of Marriage Act, and we don't want to recognize that two people who were born the same sex could ever get married and that we would have to recognize it. So they said, I don't care what any paperwork says, if you were born one sex and your partner was born that same sex, we're not going to recognize your marriage. Then, progressively, one of the courts of appeals said, well, if you underwent sex reassignment surgery, then and you're definitely now the opposite sex, then we could recognize your new heterosexual marriage, which was still not that helpful. It wasn't until 2012, which is still before the fall of the Defense of Marriage Act, that they finally said, okay, well, if you got like an amended ID or a doctor said that you had appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition, without needing to specify what it was, then we would recognize your new sex. So there's this really weird period between 2012 and 2013 where you could theoretically, and I did have, lucky me, a case where people were born, assigned the same sex at birth, one of them transitioned to the opposite sex legally, and then they therefore have a heterosexual marriage for immigration purposes, so one spouse can sponsor the other for a green card. Sweet. Luckily, the next year, US v. Windsor was decided, and same-sex marriage was recognized federally. Today, we have same-sex marriage recognized federally, and we have people's transitions recognized federally. So it seems like things are great, but unfortunately, LGBTQ people still face numerous difficulties because of inequities in all sorts of systems. That includes that tons of folks can't get married abroad, and that messes up their processing for coming to the United States. Means that, for example, if you win asylum, you can normally bring along your spouse, unless, of course, you come from a country where you couldn't have possibly been married before you ran here. It also means that certain deadlines back in the past, before same-sex marriage was recognized, are missed, and if you want to go back and try and get that benefit for your spouse, you're going to end up having a federal litigation fight about it. And to this day, I think that although officers have received some training, the last time I had a really homophobic officer say something totally vile, I went to the supervisor said, we had a training. One training. That was gonna work. So, officers still aren't necessarily comfortable with LGBTQ couples, with LGBTQ people. I've had situations where I go in with a client and I inform an officer, hey, my client uses he, him pronouns. And the officer just stares at me and then refers to the person as it, right? I've had that happen. I have a balance that I have to strike as an attorney in terms of saying, like, hey, could you not? And being like, but please approve the case, though, because we don't want any delays. We have officers that don't understand that people coming from a long history, people coming from countries where it's not safe to be LGBT are going to have complicated histories, prior heterosexual marriages, that kind of thing. And we do have folks who are closeted, and getting the evidence together to prove that a marriage isn't for immigration purposes faces some barriers because people aren't out getting letters from mom and dad saying, this was great, really in support of this marriage, can be a challenge. So I'm over time, but suffice to say, I hope you learned something. And it's still tough for LGBTQ people today.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, my name is Lisa Weinberg. I work for Community Legal Services and Counseling Center, which we have just moved to 47 Thorndike Street. We provide free legal services for low-income immigrants and also low-income non-immigrants in housing, disability, and family law cases, primarily domestic violence cases. We also have a robust counseling program with social workers and psychologists, as well as case managers, and our staff is multilingual. So we are also a statewide organization. So if there's anybody that's from a social service organization that needs to refer people, we're a resource, and I put our pamphlets out on the table out front. I personally have been doing asylum law for 17 years. I started doing LGBT cases about 10 years ago. My first case was for a Jamaican man, and even having been an asylum lawyer for quite a long time at that point, until he came into my office, I really didn't even know what was going on in the world, the human rights violations against gays and lesbians. So I quickly, and transgender, and I quickly educated myself and was appropriately horrified and started working on these cases intensely, and I've been doing them for about 10 years. So I'm not going to give a legal training today. If you're a lawyer and you want to talk law, I have some cards here. I'm just going to do a general overview about asylum, what it is, and the human rights situation in the world today. So in 72 countries in the world, homosexuality is illegal in some form. In 8 more countries, there are no laws on the books, but the laws which are on the books, for example, are against indecent behavior or violating a religion or depraved behavior, and that is also used against homosexuals. In 13 of these countries, the death penalty is the punishment. In many of the countries, long imprisoned terms are the punishment. In some countries, people are tortured in prison for their sexual orientation, either because of their identity or to be forced to reveal names of other people in their community. Even in countries where the laws are not enforced, and there are some of them, it creates an environment where people in the community feel empowered to target them and commit violence against them, because they know that nobody's going to come to their rescue and no laws are going to be enforced if they commit those acts. In October 2017, if you go on the internet and look this up, there are just thousands of incidents. So I just picked a few of the most recent ones just to give you an example. But in October 2017, Human Rights Watch reported that 500 gay men in Indonesia have been publicly flogged. The laws extend to Muslims and non-Muslims and criminalize consensual same-sex sexual acts. The criminal code permits punishment up to 100 lashes and up to 100 months in prison. In Uganda, Article 145 of the Criminal Code criminalizes carnal knowledge against the order of nature. That crime can lead to a sentence of life in prison, and it is used regularly against homosexuals. Some of them are clients. In October of this year, the New York Times reported an ongoing crackdown by the authorities in Egypt on gays and lesbians and transgender individuals who they entrap by trolling their social media accounts. In May of this year, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights launched an investigation in El Salvador to the rampant killing of transgender individuals there. In 2006, Time magazine called Jamaica the worst place on earth for gay men. The most recent Human Rights First annual report confirms that the situation on the ground in Jamaica has not gotten any better. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of asylum law and how it came about. It started after World War II, when countries were trying to figure out a way to protect people who were fleeing persecution. As I'm sure you all know, many people fled persecution and they did not find safety in other countries, and many were actually returned back to their deaths. So it was really an answer of countries getting together for the question of how this will never happen again. So they came together and created something called the 1951 Geneva Conventions, relating to the status of refugees. At that point in 1951, 80 countries signed on and agreed to protect people from persecution. I will detail later what types of persecution that protects. In 1967, they updated it because they wanted to add people that were fleeing after World War II. So it's the same convention, but it covers more people up until this date. What happens is that countries that sign on to it, they implement their own laws on how to implement it. So in 1980, our U.S. immigration system created laws to protect people fleeing persecution, and those are the laws we still work under today. Basically, somebody can be granted asylum in the United States if they have fled persecution because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or their membership in a social group. Membership in a social group originally came about during the Geneva Conventions that I just described, because the Nazis did not only persecute Jewish people, they also persecuted homosexuals, disabled people, gypsies, Catholics, other minority groups, not just the 6 million Jewish people. So that was put in there as a provision to protect other people fleeing persecution, and it still exists to this day. It's a very complicated area of asylum law. I'll give you a general overview, but there's a lot of weeds in it if you're a lawyer. That's generally the type of case that these cases fit under, people fleeing because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. People also, if people are outspoken or politically active or are feminist and are speaking out about this in their country, they can also be political cases. Also, many people's religions persecute them because of their sexual orientation, or preach against them, or do religious conversion or other things, so they can also be persecuted on a religious basis. And in asylum, you can pick more than one category. You don't have to choose just one, but I'm mostly going to focus on the social group because that's the main category these fall under. So in the U.S., someone can apply for asylum if they were persecuted under one of those grounds I just described. And if they claim to be fearful of going back to their country, they get either an administrative legal proceeding or an immigration court legal proceeding. And that's when they make their claim to the judge or the asylum officer that they deserve to be granted asylum in the United States. The lawyer's job is to help them prove that what they're saying is true, both in their country and what happened to them personally. In countries that haven't implemented legal systems to try or hear asylum cases, the UNHCR steps in and hears those cases. As to date, 145 countries have signed the Geneva Conventions. In 1994, Attorney General Janet Reno, in her last day in office, declared that sexual orientation should be a protected ground under asylum law. And she did that by making a case precedent from the Board of Immigration Appeals and declaring that that is now precedential. It doesn't mean that every case wins. It means that she created an umbrella basis, that's an okay basis for asylum. There's certainly other legal cases, but that was a seminal moment in the history of LGBT asylum cases. The lay definition, or it's kind of legal, kind of lay, of social group is that if an individual has an immutable characteristic that they cannot change, or they should not have to change, or should not be required to change because it's fundamental to their identity, then they can identify as a social group. The second part of that is that the persecutor can be the government, or it can be someone that the government either will not control or cannot control. And that's a short summary. The harm can be physical, or it could be the threat of physical harm, it could be mental harm, or it could be harm that the persecutor actually believes is not harm, such as electroshock therapy, harmful traditional medicine practices to cure, quote unquote, cure people, conversion therapy, or I've heard about some churches doing exorcisms. So it can be other types of harm. They don't have to be, subjected to only physical harm. They also, many people don't know this, they don't have to wait in their home countries until they're harmed. If they know the conditions are so bad for them and they know that they are, that what their sexual orientation is, they can flee, and if they can prove that, these are difficult cases, but if they can prove that they are homosexual and that the country conditions are so bad in their country that they will be harmed, they have a well-founded fear of future persecution, and they can also be granted asylum. And like I said, those are a little bit harder as a lawyer, but they are also a possible claim. So that brings me into, do I have time? So that brings me into some of the barriers, the legal barriers in LGBT asylum cases that are different than other cases. Just by way of example, if I have a political activist who's been very politically active in their country, I might have a card from their political party. I might have a letter from the head of their political party. I might have all sorts of evidence that they participated in demonstrations. But by and large, LGBT people don't have a lot of evidence because they've been forced to be in the closet in their home countries. So it's very hard developing the evidence in the case, and also for them to get it. And also, as in any asylum seeker, most people don't flee with anything when they flee. So they haven't, even if they have evidence, they haven't brought it. So that's a big challenge. There's also, they were socially isolated, so they're not going to, in most countries, they're not going to have photographs of social events or pride events or other events that we commonly know that people can go to. Sometimes their families have disowned them, so they're not going to be getting a letter from their mother saying, "Oh, please help protect this person," because they often are disowned by their families if their families even know. Many may have never had a same-sex relationship because they haven't had the venue or the place to meet somebody, or they've just been simply too afraid. And many are afraid because they've had partners disappear, they've had their associates disappear. Even if they've been active in an underground way, many of their friends and colleagues have been killed or harmed, so they're very afraid. The other thing is that when you come to the U.S., you have to apply for asylum within 1 year unless you prove that you have a good exception to not applying within 1 year. And if somebody's been traumatized or imprisoned or jailed or chased out of their country, or their partner's been harmed, or whatever trauma they've experienced, many women have been raped in an effort to correct their sexuality, it's really hard to come to grips with that and come forward and talk to a lawyer and fill out an application and bring yourself forward to immigration within 1 year. And it's virtually, the times that people do, it's very impressive because that's just such a short window to be able to pull all that together. So we do sometimes prove that they should get an exception because they were so traumatized. There's lots of ways to prove that, but it makes the case harder if they haven't met that 1 year deadline. So that's a big barrier. I don't know about Stephanie, but I see a lot less women in my practice, and I think that's because women have much more restricted in their countries, maybe don't have the money to travel, might be more controlled by their male partners or by their fathers. It depends, of course, what country they come from, but we see a lot more gay men coming to us for help than lesbian women. They also are more likely to have been raped, and they are less likely to come forward easily, and they're not often trained to speak out, or they were socialized not to speak out. So I actually tried to find some women to speak on this panel tonight, and I couldn't do it, and I think that is probably fits right into that. Right now, in the Trump administration, and actually even before Trump, these cases are taking so long to be heard. By the time they're heard, people's memories are flawed. I mean, people already have flawed memories, and that's hard in any legal case. But the longer it goes, the more things get jumbled up, and that's true for any of us who even haven't experienced trauma. So that's another challenge in the cases. I haven't had this experience too much, and it may be because I practice in Massachusetts, but I've heard that expectations of judges and asylum officers of stereotypical LGBT behavior or presentation is often a barrier to these cases, and it causes people to not be successful or to have to appeal their case because they just didn't fit into a stereotype, which many people don't. And that's so the last thing I want to talk about is they face additional difficulties that other asylum seekers don't face as much when they come to the United States, in that many asylum seekers, especially the low-income ones, they go and they stay at their church, or they stay in a friend's couch or a family member's couch, or they find somebody that can help them. And I've heard about clients going into like an African storefront and asking the person behind the counter, where are all the people from my country, or a lot of go to, for example, here in Boston, Waltham, because a lot of Ugandans are there. But these folks, they can't go to people in their community because they're going to be rejected here in the United States too, and we call that double marginality. So they have an extra layer of challenges once they come to the United States. I already talked about the one-year deadline. All asylum seekers are afraid of the authorities, and this group included. Many are traumatized. Many have used their last penny just to get here. They unfortunately can't work when they come to the United States legally, and they can't work even for a number of months after they apply for asylum. So they're really stuck in a difficult situation and needing help from other people and living on the margins. They're afraid of deportation. They still live in cultural and social isolation, as I said. And let's face it, it's still dangerous here in the United States. We're not perfect either. So my transgender clients tell me they're still afraid walking in the streets, and they're still they have to live with more safety, but still fear. And then there's really a lack of specialized counseling services for this population. Even in my office, we have torture counselors and people who counsel trauma survivors, but there's just a unique service and type of counseling that these folks need that is hard to find somebody who's especially trained in these kind of cases. We also use experts in asylum cases to discuss either the human rights conditions in countries or to document somebody's psychological or medical trauma, and we get volunteers to do that through Physicians for Human Rights or volunteers at our own office, and not all of them are well trained in these type of cases because it's a really specialized area. So there's a lot of gaps. I'm happy to say that we're generally successful in these cases. I've developed a lot of expertise, as a lot of other lawyers have too, and I've been speaking to groups like this for a number of years, and I find a lot more awareness now in communities about what's going on in the world than I did 10 years ago, so that's heartening too. It used to be, people would be shocked at those statistics that I originally talked about, and people aren't shocked anymore, so that's a step. That's all.
Thank you. That was Stephanie Fisher and Lisa Weinberg, and they'll be sticking around for the question and answer period later. Speaking of which, I'm a terrible MC. I started to go through the format for this evening, and then I was distracted by a shiny object, and I never finished. So we're going to see the three short videos right now, one from Cameroon, one from Uganda, and one from Jamaica. And after that, we will have three speakers, one from Cameroon, one from Jamaica, and one from Uganda. And when they've finished speaking, then we'll have a question and answer period where you can ask any one of the five of them whatever's on your mind that you learned tonight. So let me, and after that, there'll still be time to mingle for a while in the hallway. We do have to be completely out of the library by 9 o'clock, so wrap that up by 8:45. So let's start with this is a trailer for the film Born This Way about conditions in Cameroon.
democracy, you don't have human rights. They were arrested because they are dressed like this. The police say, oh, there is a gay here. 5 years in prison.
Une bande de personnes s'est approchée des hommes et ils sont venus dans les vous les lesbiennes là. Moi, ce qui m'a sauvée, c'est parce que j'ai fait la force.
C'est illégal au Cameroun pour deux personnes de même sexe de faire l'amour. Tu ne peux pas vivre ta vie d'homosexuel au Cameroun. Tu seras à un moment donné ou à un autre rattrapé par la loi.
Dès que j'ai le couteau, j'ai pu bouger, j'ai plus personne. Les 3 autres sont venus devant moi. Ils ont commencé à me cravater. Sache que tu es un gars mort.
Je suis chrétienne, mais je suis homosexuelle. Ça, c'est difficile. Ici, c'est un centre qui fait dans le droit des homosexuels. On nous laisse exister, mais il faut qu'on soit discret. C'est la famille, c'est la communauté.
Quand je sors peut-être pour me balader, c'est comme si c'était un bandit qu'on a attrapé.
Le fait qu'on nous persécute, qu'on nous mette en prison tout le temps, ça nous pousse à vouloir quitter le pays. Alors qu'on veut bien y rester, alors qu'on veut bien nous battre pour la cause dans notre pays qu'on aime bien.
Je me sens très inquiet, très anxieux. Je me demande où est-ce qu'on va.
Je ne veux pas me faire semblant pour faire plaisir aux autres. Ça, c'est ce que je suis.
Il y a ce que la personne est vraiment, ce qu'elle pense être au fond d'elle-même.
I want the decision of the Supreme Court of Cameroon in the points I raised. You remember the trial of Rosa Parks? It is because the trial went to the Supreme Court of the United States that everything was possible for the future.
And now, call me Kuchu from Uganda.
I'm the first gay man to be open in Uganda.
Hello and welcome to Reporters, the programme that brings you the very best of France 24 reporting from around the world. In this edition we head to Cameroon to focus on the persecution of homosexuals, victims of bullying and violence. Gay people in the country are also subjected to heavy legal penalties, with rights groups
to come out and say,
Sorry.
I'm gay, it's not this.
There is neither LGBT nor straight. We are all one.
I'm the first gay man to be open in Uganda. The very first gay man. I opened my eyes and this is the real thing, we are not pretending. I wanted to begin the fight to liberate our people.
That's one reason I decided to come out, no matter what. I have 2 children. I am a lesbian.
In this country, to come out and say, yes, I'm gay, it's not easy.
95% of the population does not support homosexuality.
The anti-homosexuality bill proposes life imprisonment and death for aggravated homosexuality.
If this bill passes, they say within 24 hours someone should report the person he knows to be gay. We are really going back into a ministry regime.
This is the one that called for hanging here. I think Ugandans are interested in looking at pictures of homosexuals.
The neighbors were saying that I will be the next victim.
God's law is that homosexuality is sin, and the wages of sin is death.
This man should be arrested, tried, sentenced, hanged.
Sometimes I fear if they come and get me here when I'm alone.
It is one thing being outed, and another one being denied.
Uganda
can't wipe out homosexuality. We found ourselves and we accept and rejoice in the way we are.
I cannot allow Ugandan children to be recruited into homosexuality. I'll never allow
It's not evil. The ones I've met are nurtured, they are born homosexuals.
Who are you to judge? Is that love?
The synonym of the queers here, K-U-C-H-U.
They kept on saying we're not here, but over it, we are here.
And this last one is actually a complete short film called Unchecked Homophobic Violence in Jamaica.
Some lesbians in Jamaica live in a state of constant fear. We live knowing that the probability of us being killed is very high.
Dwayne Jones was a transgender youth who was chased out of home at about 14 years old. He was killed because he was at a party, he was dressed in female wear, and someone at the party outed him.
This was at a street dance with about 300 people, and it appeared that no one attempted to intervene as they ran him down, stabbed him, shot him 3 times, and then ran over him with a car and left him to die on the side of the road.
How does it reflect on society when you have a 16-year-old kid that's being so brutally murdered and nothing happens, no consequence? When I was in Jamaica, I interviewed over 77 LGBT people. The one thing that we heard time and time again was about how they were not accepted by society. Kids as young as 12 years of age being kicked out of their homes.
I was beaten by 6 guys along with my brother and my mother in Spanish Town, where I had to run and pack my things and leave from that community. That's how I ended up here.
I have been following the homeless LGBT youth who live in storm drains. For these youth, it means that they have shown signs of behavior that is outside of the heterosexual norms. That may mean that they are bullied at home, at school, or bullied within their families. Sometimes communities threaten to beat the gay youth, presumably to beat the gayness out of him. And the threat can be escalated to threats of death or threats of burning down the home in which the youth lives. These persons feel that there is nowhere to go.
Homosexuality is not necessarily illegal in Jamaica. However, Jamaica does have the buggery laws on its books. The buggery laws are very old laws that come from when Jamaica was under British rule. While it doesn't outlaw homosexuality, it does outlaw anal sex between men. But the interpretation by different government agencies, including the police, fuels homophobia.
There have been too many cases in which persons who have attacked members of the LGBT community have not been charged, let alone convicted.
I was beaten up by 4 police officers in a pharmacy in Kingston in front of over 200 people. I went to live in hiding. One day I was stuck in traffic and a man walked across from a parked car on the other side of the road, and he came across and said to me, he said, "We'll find you and we're going to kill you." That was a life-changing moment. I didn't go back home.
People are leaving Jamaica because they fear for their lives. They don't feel safe at home in Jamaica. And they're moving to countries like Canada to find safety.
The reason I left Jamaica is because I was kicked out of the closet, so I had to flee the country that I was born in to seek refuge in a country where I am fully accepted for my sexual orientation.
I worry every day about the LGBT people in Jamaica. I worry every day. I get phone calls, I got emails, I get letters asking for help. My life is in danger back home. Can you help?
No one deserves to be hunted and chased out of their homeland. And I think it's supported by our government in the fact that they don't do anything. Why we just can't be allowed to be who we are, treated with respect and dignity that we deserve.
Okay, as we turn off the projector and get rid of the screen, I'd like to bring up to the stage 3 asylum seekers. Sean Martin from Jamaica, John Long Jones Wambere from Uganda, who you just saw briefly in one of these films, and Gail Chot from Cameroon. Sean and John have successfully completed their asylum process, and Gail is still in the middle of it.
Downtown prison, fuels an atmosphere of fear for gangs.
Good evening. My name is John Wambere. I'm from Uganda. I prefer to go by the names Long Jones. That's my identity. It relates with the work I do. I have been an activist for over a decade, and I'm currently a resident in Woburn. My first home was Cambridge, and I still consider myself being a Cambridgian. So in 2014, just an overview from what you saw in the documentary, I was invited to Boston to come and speak, and I was not able to go back home until today. In November, actually, yeah, in the next couple of days, it will be 3 years since I was granted asylum. And I'm now working towards my citizenship, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And I always say, I can't wait that day when I naturalize myself, I'll be on that first plane to get back home. Like everyone, the worst thing you want to ever be part of is fleeing your home, a place you have grown and been cradled in. A lot that I reflect on, but I have let go, and a lot that I hope someday I'll see again. Through my process in this country for asylum, I just want to reiterate this, that everyone has their story. Others, it will work out quickly. Others, it will take a long time. I have friends who I found already in the process and are still waiting and have never got an interview date. I have friends whom I spoke to and they said theirs worked within 3 months, 4 months. So everyone, your story is what moves you forward. In Uganda, I worked, I co-founded Spectrum Uganda, but I was also a private business person. I had my own travel business. Spectrum Uganda, an organization I co-founded, was specifically working to advocate and ensure that the LGBTI people, especially the gay men, were receiving health care as enshrined in the Ugandan constitution, which was a problem. And we wanted to also ensure that the Uganda AIDS Commission included LGBT people in their package. While they did their research, there was no breakdown of LGBTI percentages in terms of infections. Everything was generalized. When you look at the adverts that run everywhere, it's about heterosexuals. There's nothing that is being talked about same-sex or anal sex in general. Even when scholars debate and doctors confess, to an extent even that families of some heterosexuals have confessed that anal sex existed in bedrooms. The politicians didn't want to look at it that way. They wanted to hijack it and take it to further their agenda. So Uganda is a Christian-based country. The majority, about 60, over 70 are Christians, and a small percentage, the second, about 23 are Muslims, and then the rest are divided between the Pentecostals. Scott Lively from Springfield, who visited Uganda, had a conference with all the leaders, teachers, parents, church leaders, high security profile, and told them that homosexuals had an agenda to recruit children. And that is where the battle started. And that's where things went totally bizarre for the LGBT community. We have a 1950s law, which, because we're a British colony, which is canonology against the order of nature, but for you to be, I would say for you to be persecuted or to be sentenced based on that specific article is more complex because it involves a lot of proof that there was contact, that there was penetrative sex involved, or basically the act. The new law that was drafted in 2009 after Scott Lively came did not have any such provisions. It was based on perception, based on either how you dress, or somebody just suspects. It was so vague, and it was very dangerous to the Ugandan LGBT community. And this specific law created a lot of interest, and it had a lot of backing from the religious right-wing fundamentalists, especially the Pentecostals, I would say, and a lot of support also from the Anglican Church. The politicians took it and made it their own agenda because they wanted to politicize it to enable them get back into politics. So based on all that, when I arrived here in the US, my hosts told me it was not safe to go back home. To me, that wasn't what was ringing in my mind. I knew I had a bigger and greater, I had greater things to do. I'm part of a bigger community. It's just bigger than me. And after the president signed the bill into law, my name was over the radio stations, my pictures were in the media, and I reached out to one of my, a couple of my colleagues, and they told me, I think it's better for you to stay there for a while. But that while was never while. It has become forever. And so I just want to say that 2 months ago, I was united with my daughter. She's here now. Yeah, it was a long way waiting because I always remembered I just told her I'm gone. She knew, as usual, I'll be back home in 2 weeks. And it took her 3 years to see me again. So we are back as a family. But the challenges that we face when we move into, I would say, second or third home countries is unmentionable. Being in the US here, waking up every morning, you can't go to work was the most disturbing thing. Yet at the end of the day, you know that you have responsibilities. Your family, I mean, my daughter was to go to school, so I had to take care of myself. There's nothing for free. You want to do laundry, you still have to go with those, you know, you have to go with the quotas and just make sure that you do what you have to do. So it's quite challenging. It's quite challenging, and it's a very, very, very stressful process. It involves a lot of patience, and I've seen moments when people have backtracked and they give up. They say, I really don't care, I should be heading home. I'd rather go back home. The refugee process in Kenya, I talked to my friends, some of them have not been able to make it through. They've died in the process. They've gone back home. They came alive in the refugee camp. They've gone back home, you know, dead. Some have been relocated, but they are struggling. Some of the agencies, and I'm not bad-mouthing, but this is the reality, some of the agencies that have brought them here bring them, but they don't really help them much. They put them with strangers. They put them again back to live in the apartments with straight people. And some of these straight people could have also been refugees, maybe political refugees. So there is a whole mess still that goes on, even when they come in as refugees. You know, they struggle finding jobs. Even when they find the jobs, still they do not have that proper training, you know, to enable them into a smooth integration into this whole new community. And for that reason, an example of myself, I had to go back to school because that was the best way I felt I was gonna understand myself and the new community and life in this country. So I'm now a student major of sociology. I'm at Bunker Hill, and I'm in my process transferring to Northeastern University, hopefully. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and thank you for the lawyer starting. I mean, I'm taking time because I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about. I'm trying to kind of structure everything because I can't relate to so much the videos that they showed. I look at a video and like, this is home. These are my friends on the videos. And when Lisa was talking about the situation of human rights, I was like, you didn't mention that in Cameroon you can go to jail just because you drink. You take an alcohol beverage that is labeled as a main thing. It can bring you to jail. I got a friend that spent 5 years in jail just because he was drinking an alcohol beverage that was labeled as a man or male or female beverage. So I really don't know. I've been here, it has been 3 years now. It was October 29. As John, you know, I came in here 2014. I've been traveling. I've been doing activism. If I have to go back, I've been in the LGBT movement since 2008. It took me a year myself. I went through a lot of struggle to kind of deal with the fact that I was gay, accepting it myself, and then now trying to find out, okay, there's a big community, there are people out there that I belong to, and I want to be able to share that with my mates back home. So I created I'm gonna put together a lesbian group support, like we were doing community outreach, education, and whenever possible, we were kind of partnering with Health Center that were more kind of close to LGBT, like you can't officially label yourself as an LGBT center back home, but they know that, okay, this is a cover for what they're already doing. So that's what I was doing. And I think the bad part, because when you're gay back home, you can't have a job, you can't be anybody actually if you're gay. You can't go to school, you don't have a right to education, and I was kind of the opposite of everything. I had a job. I was actually running a company, communication and marketing agency, and I had a pretty good market or pretty good client. So it kind of put me on the spot. Like, how can you be gay and having a job that pay good, showing yourself on TV? You're kind of setting the example for everybody else. So I became a problem. I didn't know that. I didn't know that I became a problem. So 2013, it was after a pretty huge event that I managed as a communication officer, and I started receiving threatening message like, hey, we don't like who you are. You better find a way to either shut up what you are or not appear on my TV so that you don't set example for people. I was like, well, that's just threat. I can deal with that. 2014, started running after my group was kind of growing. It was getting more girls that were more interested knowing what they are, what they were, what they were doing, how to take care of themselves. I went to, I've been beaten, like brought to a police station and beaten, like, okay, this neighborhood is not yours anymore, you gotta move. I said, okay, I can live with that. Like, you see people on TVs, they're winning battle. That's how I saw myself. I wanted to change the thing back home. I didn't want to leave. I never thought about leaving. So I kept doing that. I moved the neighborhood 2014, and in the middle of the year, between August and September, I came here for a gathering in San Francisco. And I went back home. I spent almost a month. They were like, are you gonna be safe going back with everything that's going on now? Are you gonna be safe? I'm like, I don't care, I'm okay. I mean, I can leave. My brother had been killed, I forgot that. My brother had been killed earlier that year because of me, because I received threatening letters telling that, hey, I'm gonna bury all my brothers and sisters, and I'm gonna be the last one. Nobody's gonna be there to bury me. But I was like, okay, I can live with that. I mean, what I had in mind was just bigger than everything else. So when I get back home, I flew back on September 29th. I went home, I arrived at the airport, and one of the security agents that I've noticed that I traveled a lot that 2014, he was like, we know who you are, we know what you're going to do where you are, but just know that here we are in our country, and there you are where you are. So they don't have a power here. Technically, we are powerful here. I said, okay, I don't know what you're talking about, but I went home. And I think 2 weeks after, I was coming back from work, and I'm always going to be grateful, because just a side note, always be nice to people, your neighbors, always help them, because I don't know what I would have been today. The son of my landlord heard people, there were 2 police guys coming to my room, because obviously I was under arrest for homosexuality. And the worst part is not going to jail, is what can be done to you when you are in jail. Like when you go to jail, I've seen so many of my friends passed away after they get out of jail that you just can't imagine yourself into, you just cannot. So he heard them saying that, he heard them talking, I don't know what they were talking, he just told me, he sent me a text that, hey, I think there are people coming to your place, and I'm gonna pretend that I'm coming to, my dad needs something downstairs, and that's the best I can do. So by the time I was reading a text, it was already in front of my door, and I'm like, yeah, we're under arrest for homosexuality. I came back, so all my material, I had a computer with pretty much everything, all the gay movies, all the training that I had for the girls, it was taken. So I think I left home only with the clothes that I had on me. Thank God, like maybe 2 or 3 months before that, my birth certificate is the only thing that I had. My birth certificate and my passport are the 2 things that I put safe. I put them safe somewhere. And when I left home, because the son of my landlord come up, he's like, okay, my dad needs you some down. I said, okay, you're already gonna arrest me at this point. I'm not gonna run. Is it okay if I just go down? You can come with me. I'm just gonna go down, help my landlord, and I'm gonna go with you. They're like, no, they already had pretty much everything that they needed. So I don't think I've ever run. I don't think Usain Bolt ran as fast as I ran. And I spent 3 weeks. I think I get in contact with John. I owe him a lot. He's here. He doesn't talk about what he does, but I owe him a lot. They do everything. He did everything. He found a place for me to stay. They paid a ticket. And that's how I end up here. I end up in America because United States was the only visa that I had on my passport. If I had another one, I swear to God, I would have chosen somewhere else because the process, the process is exhausting. Like, it's not the hardest part finding, as Lisa mentioned, you need proof. I didn't have anything. I literally had only one bag. I had 2 clothes. I had 1 pair of sneakers with the one I was wearing, and that's how I came in here. It's so stressful. Right now I'm still waiting. They renewed my work authorization like 3 months ago, but I had a 2 months lap in between where I was like, wow, how is this gonna work out? What's gonna happen to me? I didn't know what to do. And it has been 3 years. I filled out the application in December 2014, and I'm still waiting for the interview. I don't know how it's gonna go. At this point, I'm just like, okay, give me a work authorization, I can live with that, and everything else I can deal with. Today, Long Jones has a family. My brother kind of messed up my mind 2 months ago. One of my brother, because we were 6. I lost my sister earlier this year, and my brother passed away in 2014. He sent me a text like, we know you're gay, you know you're a lesbian, you live in a lesbian community, and I'm gonna be the first one to tell them where you are if I know where you are. So I don't think I have any sort of family anymore. So I'm like, okay, we gotta make something happen. But the process, as I said, if I have to go through that, I'm lucky, I was lucky. A lot of people are not lucky to find a place where they can stay when they come here, where they can eat. I was lucky to have a wonderful couple. They moved almost a year ago to Alaska, but they're still in touch. I was lucky to have them, but besides the immigration process, it's not like filling the papers is just the tiny part of it. The most important is where do you live, how do you eat, how do you dress, what do you wear during the winter, how do you move from where you live to the service that you might find outside, how do you put yourself together, how do you find even information. Like today I used to be a journalist back home. Right now I'm working on writing on a blog. Like if you come, no matter what country you go to, I got a lot of friends that are one is in Australia, another one is Germany, France. Whatever country you go to, I want to be able to give resource. Say, hey, if you go there, whether you're seeking asylum, whether you're marrying somebody, this is what you need to know, because the reality is different than where you're coming from. That's what I'm working towards too. So if I got the interview, well, that's gonna be amazing. If it doesn't come, as far as they give me the work visa, I can do something with my life. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I have to say that it's never really easy to to be here and hearing other stories that oftentimes it's very similar to your own. And hearing those particular stories also brings back memories, and then we use this word that's very clinical, triggering, right? It's triggering. Nonetheless, from a very long time ago, I was quite aware that sharing these stories are important, and it's important for several reasons. One, it's some sort of a release from time to time when you can talk about it. Two, it will start to bring attention the issues there are around the world, and three, we may start to take steps to intervene in some way, shape, or form, where individuals like us, our lives can be better. So, as you hear, I'm Sean Martin. I was born and raised in Jamaica, and I lived there all my life, 25 years when I came. I was 25 years when I came to the US. However, Jamaica is as you can see, and you've heard, is one of the most homophobic countries in the world. And interestingly enough, when I hear the video, when I watch that video, as much as the experiences that were shown weren't exactly like mine, I can relate to a lot of them because I face the death threats. I face the concern of whether or not I'm going to be safe in my home at night. I've had friends who were killed, and so on and so forth. Actually, Gareth is a very good friend of mine. We've been friends for many years, and we've also did work together when I volunteered for JFLAG and JAS. So one of the specific, or a couple specific events I can share with you, I'll start with. I remember I'm always a vocal person, I'll point that out, right? And as of such, it got me my first job when I was about 17. And I was working with this office with people who are very educated, and educated where they're managers they worked with the state for one, and you have the supervisors and the managers in there. And there was a specific incident on television where the former Miss World, there was an allegation that they found her husband in a compromising situation. So here I think I was about 18 that time, and these other people were like in their 40s, 50, and so on and so forth, and they're there in the office talking about that particular media event, and they started to talk about the fact that the former Miss World husband, if they were even related to the former Miss World just by like distant cousin, they would eventually hunt this person down and killing themselves. Now imagine an 18-year-old sitting in an office hearing all these particular conversations, thinking that, well, and two, these people are my bosses. What do you think they would do to me if I'm nothing, nobody, and they're talking about other people like this? They would probably slaughter me right then and there in that office. So that one incident, and I was like, well, I really can't stay here. I would have to find somewhere else to go. I was there for a few years because I can't just up and leave, like a year or so. And my next venture took me into the hospitality industry, where I thought it would have been safer. I thought it would have been easier simply because of the fact that the people who works in the hospitality industry really works with an international community, and working with the international community, you would hope that these people would be a little bit more tolerant. However, that wasn't the case. Every day I would go to work, I will tell you that I hear death threats, and I know specifically who these threats were coming from, like threats that you need to die, you're going to go to hell, all these things, and like I was like, what have I ever done to these people? I could say some of these people I was in a better off position than them because again I worked my way up. I eventually became a manager at the resort. I went back to school. I was doing good things for the country, and I was like, hey people, I'm contributing to your country. I'm working. I'm educated. Why do you want to treat me as if that I'm nothing? I'm less than. And the sad thing about that, with a country treating me as less than, Jamaica has always treated people who are known criminals, known murderers, a lot better than people of the LGBT community. I remember one time I was in my early teens, this person who they know for a fact that this person is a killer, is a murderer, and they shut down the country's capital protesting that the police was supposed to release this person out of prison. And however, as you hear Garrett said in his video, people who are of LGBT, they would rather kill them than accept them within the community. So in 2007, I left Jamaica because there was nothing there for me to do. There was nowhere for me to go. I am very ambitious, and the fact of the matter is Jamaica couldn't support my ambition. And outside of my ambition, I mean, it was only a matter of time I would be killed. So I arrived here in 2007. I was in Florida for a year. In 2008, I moved up to Worcester, Massachusetts. I don't know why Worcester, Massachusetts. I just came to Worcester. I had a good friend of mine living here too. Actually, he's also very good friends with Gareth, and we were here, and and I made something of myself. I don't know if you saw the pamphlet or the outline. It says I'm one of the founding members of the LGBT Asylum Support Task Force. And that task force came about simply because, as you hear Gail said and Long John, when you and Lisa talked about it too, where throughout the asylum process you can't work. And I have to say that even while I was here, I had times that I didn't know what I was going to eat. I didn't know where I was going to sleep. So Linford and I, and Lisa as well, was a part of the process. We talked about having an organization that would help individuals while they're going through the process. And as much as I'm not directly affiliated with the task force anymore, the task force is still going and it's still there helping individuals. So that's all the sad parts of the story. And I have one more sad part, in the sense where after 10 years, I was able to go back to Jamaica. I was able to go back to Jamaica because last year I was granted my citizenship. And the first time, and I was also able to vote the first time. It was like the other day, it was local election. I felt so excited. I was like, yay, citizenship, voted. So when I went back to Jamaica, because I miss my family dearly, and you hear these individuals talk about your roots, everything that you've known, you've been away from, and I've been away from it for 10 years. But nonetheless, I went back. I was able to spend time with my family, friends that I've known for many, many years. And on the last day, and I don't know if it was kind of a reminder of the life that I had lived, because when I was here, I was like a tourist. But the last day, I wanted to clean the car up before I took it back to the car dealership, and we were at this car wash. And funny enough, in Jamaica, you're at a car wash and there's a bar that people can come up and buy drink. It was like, ooh, buy alcohol and you're gonna drive later on. But nonetheless, I wasn't drinking. I swear to you, I wasn't drinking. Nonetheless, we were there and we were talking, and then this guy came up, and there was a female bartender, and then there was another guy who just came around the bar to get something. And then this guy came up and be like, I don't want that guy to serve me. I want the female to serve me because I don't want anything from guys. I don't like guys. Guys are not supposed to serve me. If this person is gay, I know I will kill him, so on and so forth. And I was there and I was like thinking that, well, whether you're straight, gay, or whatever, you go to a bar, you go to some place for service, you're not asking this person to come sleep with you in bed, right? I mean, unless it's that type of facility, then you'd be like, you know, what? In this case, he's just going to get a drink, and he wasn't even buying it. It's a simple drink he wanted. Get the drink that you'd want and go about your business. But no, he made it clear that he thinks that anybody and everybody who's gay needs to be killed. So I point that out because after 10 years, I was hoping that at least the mentality would have changed. However, it hasn't changed. I will still go back to Jamaica because, again, my family is still there. I saw my aunt, she's 87 now. I was so happy to see her. I saw my sisters, I saw my niece's nephew. It was a very good experience. But there are people there that's still being killed. People there that have no place to go. People there, as you hear this, it's gotten even so bad now where even kids are being killed. And as of such, I would want to say that I'm fortunate, but I'm still sad for the other individuals who are there. And I hope that at the end of this day, at the end of this program, we can all do something. Do something. And another good thing is that right now, 2 years ago, I got my bachelor's. And right now, actually, I was supposed to be in my class. I'm in grad school. I'm doing my MSW. I don't know, social worker. Maybe someday I'll go there and be able to do something with that. Or something here that will connect to something there. So, again, do something. Thank you very much.
We have. Oh. We have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions. So if you have a question for any or all of our panelists, just line up on the ramp here and use the microphone. I'll remind you that your voice will be recorded, but your face will not. Cameras and videos are only pointing at the stage. And just listening to your stories, the thing that moved me was not so much what you went through, but that you're here now. And there are other people going through it right now. I mean, you're the lucky ones. You're a citizen, you're on your way to citizenship, you're on your way to being an asylum granted. And it's been a hard road for each of you, but just because you're here doesn't mean the roads are finished for everybody else. So I'm very proud of what you've done, and I feel for you and for everyone coming behind you.
Hi, I was really in awe and inspired by the risks that you guys took in order to be a voice in the community that you lived in. And I'm just wondering that for those of us who have the privilege of, living in these communities where it's fairly safe to speak out and to advocate and being an activist isn't as much of a danger, what can we do to help your communities from here?
Is that to any of us?
Yeah, any of you.
Okay, so first I have to say that last year I was working with Coro Allegro in Christchurch, Cambridge to raise money. We raised money about $12,000 and we split it to two groups of refugees in Kenya, LGBT Ugandan refugees actually in Kenya. And the other part of the money also was sent partly to Uganda to help out with advocacy for PrEP, So when it comes to what can be done, I mean, I always say, depending on the situation, I know we used to call for people to sign petitions, but I can't really say that petitions are the ongoing thing right now. It has taken a different toll. I just want to quickly clear this, why I'm saying that. So the law that the Ugandan government passed was nullified in 2015 August. After they signed the law, we went to the Constitutional Court and they overturned it, actually to the Supreme Court, and it was overturned on technical grounds that the passing was not in good faith. First of all, there was lack of quorum in the parliament to pass the law. But we missed the major element that we wanted. We wanted the definition or to define the constitutionality of our citizenship. We missed that part because it was based on technical grounds. So that's why I say petitions may not really help right now, but I mean, if you go, I'm working with a group of 4 people, that's on my part. We are setting up an organization called Friends of Spectrum International, 4C. We are still looking into the process of it becoming legally registered as a non-for-profit. It's a long process, but we still are working through global giving. And we are trying to get some of the rural organizations in Uganda onto the global giving platform where people can donate and, be able to support the work they are doing, because that's the best we can do until we set ourselves. But you can, if you go, we have organizations like Spectrum Uganda. If you go on the website, you can donate to them. We have Barara Rise Foundation. This is a rural organization. We have Icebreakers Uganda, which is working with health services too. There is Freedom and Rome, which is a lesbian organization. And there are many transgender organizations. So, yeah. But if you want to specifically direct, or if you have a project in mind, I'm happy to help you and work with you and see how you want to further it.
Thank you.
May I answer
And
that
just,
one too?
yeah, I was going to add something else. Sorry. No, I was earlier this year, because kids go back to school every September, and we started this. I started with a couple of friends this year. We sent 5 kids this year to school, like 5 LGBT kids. Like, hey, you might not have a place, but we want you to have education so that you can define what you want for your future. Now, as John said, is what you want to do, depending on what you have as goals, the best way we can help, I will be happy to do that. I tend not to take money from anybody, but if there are other ways of helping, I will be happy to provide a way to do that. So, thank you.
Here in Massachusetts, there's a group called the LGBT Asylum Task Force. It's based out of Worcester, Massachusetts, and Sean alluded to it earlier. But of course, like every group, they're raising money, but they're always also looking for host families, donations, food, clothes, winter coats, anything that people need when they first arrive. And as you've heard, that's when they really need help the most. And people have formed wonderful relationships too through the task force and developed second families. And like I talked about, they're marginalized here when they come too, because they can't get help from the people from their country often. So it's a great group, and there is a website, LGBTasylumtaskforce.org, right? Yeah.
And just to add, on top of the LGBT, they also have, the more thing, getting into the new community is hard. The country is different. Any skills, like every skills. I remember Polly, I really thank you, because she worked with the task force, and I used to volunteer also there. So anything that can help, let's say you go to a different country, what would you need to be integrated in that country? Think that way, and you're going to find a way. Now there are a lot of pamphlets outside. you can get close to Lisa, you can get close to me. We can give you all the organization that we have that works with asylum seekers. And I think Bridget was here. She was outside with RIM. They also help asylum seekers. So just think, if you were to live out of your country, you wanted to move there, what would you need? And you're going to find the answer.
I would suggest you to search for JFLAG. They're the organization that does a lot of the groundwork in Jamaica. I'm 100% certain that they do have a website, and there are ways for you to donate through that website as well.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming to Cambridge. As most people know, especially probably the attorneys, Cambridge is a very proactive when it comes to immigrant, refugee, and especially undocumented immigrant rights. Over the past few years, we've worked very hard on creating legislation to help protect the community. As the attorney probably would know, the Safe Communities Act is making its way through the house, through our legislative house, the state house, as we speak, but it's stalled. Cambridge has enacted legislation to support the ACLU's call for Governor Baker to pull out of the 287G program. We have passed legislation locally to support refugees that are here under temporary protective status program. We're working on creating a legislative defense fund for undocumented immigrants. We're doing quite a bit here in Cambridge. CERC was obviously created here in Cambridge. What I'm asking, especially of the attorneys, if you were given a wish list, what legislative, we know that immigration law is federal law, and a lot of people believe that there's nothing to little that we can do on the local level. I disagree. I think we can do quite a bit. What legislative initiatives would you like to see on a local level?
Oh gosh, is it my birthday? I hate to be a negative Nancy. One of the essential problems that we have is that ICE does not respect local laws. You were speaking in some technical terms that I would want to define for the audience.
Sure.
There's what's called an ICE detainer program, which was coupled with other federal law, where basically ICE would go and find anybody who'd been arrested for anything by local law enforcement, especially things like driving without a license, which is like the number one. Like, I ask my clients, hey, do you have a criminal record? They're like, I'm not a criminal. And I'm like, how about driving without a license? They're like, yeah, 12 times. Because it happens, because how you can't get a license, right? It's not, you would think of it as a civil offense, but it's criminal. People get arrested. And if they're arrested and they're in court, then ICE shows up and says, hey, do you have someone who's not a citizen? How about you just hold on. We're coming down, we're gonna arrest them. I think arrests for minor crimes like that gives ICE an opportunity that I wish they didn't have. I don't see any reason why anyone should ever be arrested for driving without a license. I think locally it would be great if we could decriminalize some of these minor offenses that relate to being undocumented, or authorize people to have driver's licenses, because
we've tried that.
That'd be neat, wouldn't it?
We've tried that.
Yeah. Because it would benefit everybody. If you don't have a driver's license, it's hard to get insurance. If you don't have insurance and you don't have a license, you get in an accident, everybody's screwed. So there's a benefit to having people be able to be documented, or at least decriminalize it, because now the current administration has expanded its priority list to everyone, but on that list is anybody who's ever been charged with a crime that hasn't been resolved or has been convicted of a crime. Well, why is driving without a license a criminal offense? It should be more like speeding, which is a civil offense, and then we could just sneak you right off that list of everybody, maybe. But we are limited because ICE isn't going to do what we tell them to do, so we just have to give them fewer opportunities to do what they're going to try to do.
One of the reasons why I asked is that we're working on immigrant voting rights. I've always believed that one of the reasons why immigrants are an easy target is because they're generally poor, they can't vote, meaning they have no power. So if we gave, not meaning undocumented immigrants, but if we gave immigrants that are here, documented immigrants, giving them the right to vote. That would be one way that we can give them power. A lot of immigration attorneys are not in favor of it because it delays the process, the citizenship process.
I
It
worry
could
that it
delay
would
the process.
confuse things, because if anybody votes in an
There's a box
election
on
they're not authorized to vote in, right? You'd have to have
Right.
two separate kinds of ballots. And if people
No.
accidentally voted in a federal election, they'd never be allowed to be a citizen. So as an attorney,
Not
I
if they
just
vote
cringe, like,
legally.
wait, don't pick up the wrong ballot. Like, don't
Well, there's
screw over your
there's
future.
communities in Maryland, there's 6 communities in Maryland, for example, that have legally passed immigrant voting rights. So on the citizenship form, if there's a question that if you're asked, have you ever voted in an election? You can answer yes if you voted legally. For example, New York City allows immigrants to vote in school committee, not in the city council. I've always believed that if we can give immigrants more power, we can assist them. But I'm getting off my original question. Thank you.
I just had a comment and a question. The comment is that it's really, to me, very humbling to hear your stories, and I'm humbled, and I bow to you for sharing those stories with us, because I know how painful they are, how triggering they can be, and although we do this for the greater good, you know, and to spread information, it's also, I understand how difficult it was. In fact, as we were watching those films, I was thinking we should have talked about trigger warnings before we even started watching some of those films, because it's very traumatic. So that's my comment. My question, I'm asked Aaron, I'm one of the commissioners here in Cambridge, and I asked Aaron, where were you all from? And in terms of where you living here. And the reason why I asked her that question was because one of the things that is very difficult for anybody, like your question is, what would you need when you go away and you're moving to another country? And so for me, I always think of what is a person's, if you're not meeting someone's basic needs, then everything else doesn't matter. In so many ways, if you're dealing with food insecurity, if you don't have a warm coat, if you don't have warm boots, that's the first thing that we take care of. One should think to take care of, right? Your basic needs. So when the question was asked about what can we do, my first thought was, how do we meet basic needs? For folks like you, you're all more settled, but for people coming in now and trying to get asylum, how do we get boots to people? How do we get food to people? How do we get coats to people? How do we do that in the various communities, from Worcester to Woburn to Roxbury? You know, so are there ways in which we can sort of be more grassroots about it, I guess is the question I'm asking.
I think we'll defer back to the task force, the LGBT Asylum task force. And I have to say, interestingly, as much as they seem local, they're not local. I remember a few years ago, we ended up helping someone in San Francisco. So it's the asylum support, LGBTAsylumsupport.org. And there's a wealth of information on there on how to participate and how to be a part of that specific community. And I know that there are other local organizations that's sharing, like which one?
Refugee Immigration Ministry works around Boston.
Right.
But it's it's a really good model, and I think it would be really powerful if it was replicated in other communities or churches or community groups or, wherever people congregate. And the other thing that's really powerful about it is when people come here, they think they're the only ones, and then they get to find out through this task force that they're actually not. There's actually people from other people from their country here in the U.S. who have fled here, or even other countries that have experienced the same thing. And when I watch this, I see that that's part of the power, along with the basic needs getting met.
And just like, if you really want to be real, like, Pastor Judy is the one running the asylum task force. Pastor Judy, if you want her number, she will be happy to add you on the mailing list, and you're gonna be like, I can't do this anymore. But if you want that, I can give it to you.
And for those watching on television, there was a comment from the audience suggesting an organization called the Refugee Immigration Ministry, which is r-i-m.net. Am I right? We think I'm right. Okay, so there are no more questions, so we'll bring this to a close. Before we thank our panelists again, I just wanted to say we have about a half an hour before we have to leave the library, so stick around and talk to our panelists, talk to the people that have been tabling in the lobby about their different organizations, and have some cold pizza. So thank you, all five of you.